Storm had passed. I was about to. He sucked up a mouthful of noodles and chewed. The lemongrass tasted real, and the noodles were soft and salty. If they had gone a little cold, he didn't care. Rohi sighed and relaxed into her chair. After dinner, they walked home slowly. She took his hand, and he leaned against her. For a while, it was almost like they were courting again, only deeper, richer, fuller. This was the life that both of their parental groups had given up, and Kit didn't understand any of them at all. At the rooms, Giselle was sitting on the couch, spooling through entertainment news feeds on her handheld. As they came in, she lifted a finger to her lips and pointed toward the nursery. "He fell asleep 10 minutes ago," she said. "Ate well, shot out his body weight, giggled, played, cried for 15 seconds, and out." "Thank you, Mama," Kit said. And Giselle stood up and wrapped him in her arms. "It's not for you," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "I'm soaking in all the grandbaby I can while I have him, storing up for winter." After she left, Rohi went to her office, walking softly to keep from waking the baby, and he sat at his own desk and pulled up his message queue. He started the camera. "Hey, Dad, I love you too. Thank you for coming close enough to send the message. I know how hard that can be. And I love you for it. Having a kid is the scariest thing I've ever done. And I love it. I love having a kid. I love being a dad. I know you and Mom didn't have things go the way you'd have picked. But no matter what happened, I always knew you cared about me. I learned that from you. If that's the only thing I manage to pass on, it'll be worth it. It's a great legacy. Seriously. The best." He tried to think of something more, but exhaustion was seeping in at the corners of his brain, and he didn't really know what else there was to say. He reviewed it, sent it, scrubbed his system the way he always did when he'd gotten something from the Underground's network, then showered and got ready for bed. Rohi wasn't there. He found her standing over the crib, looking down at the new little life they'd made together. Bakari's soft, round belly rose and fell as he slept. Kit stood there with her and with him. "He's a strong little guy, isn't he?" Rohi said. "He is. And his parents love him." "Okay, then. Let's go." Chapter 10. Fayez. Planetary geology wasn't the sort of degree people usually went into looking for a career as a kingmaker. There wasn't a lot of crossover between freshman analysis of sedimentary patterns and having people vie for your influence over issues of life and death. Add in political sway over a galaxy-spanning empire, and the overlap was pretty narrow. But without intending to, Fayez had stumbled into it. He was floating in Lee's private cabin with a bone-colored bulb of whiskey in one hand. It was a thick, peaty distillation that was too harsh for him when they were under thrust. A couple of weeks on the float did something to deaden his taste buds, and so, at times like this, it was perfect. Lee, Elvy's second-in-command, was queuing up a message from home, or at least from Laconia, which, despite having lived there for years, Fayez still didn't think of as home. "Here," Lee said, pushing back from his station. "Okay, who am I looking at?" Fayez said. "His name is Galwan Uddin," Lee said. "He's a senior researcher and extrapolator." "Thank you for your time, Dr. Sarkis. I want you to know how much I appreciate it." Since it was a recording, Fayez sighed. "I wanted to share with you some thoughts my work group has put together. I think you will find them very promising," the thin-faced man said, then visibly gathered himself. His expression settled into the thing Fayez expected on grade school teachers who were trying to be approachable. Light, I'm sure you know, is a membrane phenomenon on the surface of time. Fayez drained the bulb of the last drop of whiskey and put his hand out for another. Lee had it ready. For half an hour, Oot Dean made what, in the end, was a surprisingly comprehensible case that Elvy's slow-life jellyfish had ended their evolutionary arc as a complex, vastly distributed brain-like structure that relied on the counterintuitive truth that time dilation put photons in a state of instantaneous emission from a distant star and absorption by an observing eye, even if they seemed to outside observers, like fires, to travel for years in between. The rate-limiting step on a system like that would always be mass, and so technologies for moving mass, inertia manipulation, shortcut ring gates, would be prioritized, which evidence suggested they had been. By the end of the presentation, Fayez felt almost as excited as Oud Dean seemed to be, and he hadn't even finished his second whiskey. You see, I hope, Oud Dean said, why I am so hopeful for this path of research, which is why I need to ask your help. The new orders from the Science Directorate putting us at the beck and call of Colonel Tanaka. I don't dispute that the High Consul has the absolute right to direct our efforts as needed, but you have his ear. If you could encourage him to refrain from interrupting our research unless it is critical to the Empire, I only say it because I feel we are on the verge of a breakthrough, and I would hate for the High Consul to make his decision about our work group without a full understanding of our situation. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Oud Dean licked his lips anxiously, and the message ended. How charming to pretend there's still a High Consul running this bumblefuck, Fayez thought, but didn't say aloud. Some things were too dangerous, even for a kingmaker. I have half a dozen like this, Lee said. Work group and research leads who got the message to do whatever Tanaka asks. Several of them she has already retasked. They know we can't do shit about it, right? Because we literally can't do shit about that. You got the brief about what Tanaka's doing? I did, Lee said, and then pointedly didn't expand on it. We have a great many absolute top priorities. We can't do them all. I get that, Fayez said. But Elvy's not the one setting them. She's been very open about letting expertise place the goalposts. But she is the adored saint of Duarte's Holy Ghost, Lee said. People want her to intercede for them. And so they ask you to ask me to ask her, Fayez said. No, one more, so that she'll ask him. Or, functionally, Trejo. Yes. The way we do things, it's amazing humans ever figured out shoes. I'll talk to her. But you know how she is right now. I do. Thank you, Dr. Sarkis. Keep plying me with drink and you'll wind up turning my head, Dr. Lee. Lee's thin smile was as close to emotional intimacy as the man got. Fayez liked him. The halls of the Falcon hummed and glowed. He navigated his way through them from handhold to Laconian blue handhold. Some of the younger members of the crew launched themselves like belters, zipping from intersection to intersection without touching a wall in between. He wasn't that guy. Getting where he was going with all his cartilage intact had become a more interesting prospect in the last couple decades. The thing about expertise was that it wasn't actually transferable. Winston Duarte had cut his teeth in the MCRN's logistics department, where he had apparently been an underappreciated genius. It was easy to see how his brilliance there had helped build his breakaway empire. He pulled it off, and by grabbing up samples of the protomolecule and the experts who could use it, he tamed enough of the alien technology to put all humanity under his heel. For a while, anyway. Being good at something Even the best that humanity's billions could offer didn't make him good at everything. It just made him too powerful to say no to. And so, when he decided to make himself into an immortal god-king, not for his own benefit, but to selflessly provide the human race with the continuing stable leadership that it needed in order to storm heaven and kill God, he'd already talked himself and everyone around him into thinking he was as impressive as the story about him claimed. Only a few people officially knew how badly that plan had gone. Elvie was one. Fayez was another. He heard Elvie and Kara talking as soon as he came into the corridor for her lab. The door to Elvie's office was open, and Kara was floating in the open space between the workbench and the medical scanners. The young girl's face was bright with excitement, and she gestured as she spoke, as if she needed to stuff more meaning into the words than mere syllables could hold. Elvie was strapped into her crash couch, taking notes as they spoke. Except for the part where they didn't look even vaguely genetically related, they reminded Fayez of a grandmother and granddaughter bonding through solving some great puzzle. Even before he could make out what they were saying, the tones of their voices told the story. Giddy and enthusiastic was the good spin. Fevered and manic also fit. Then there was this sense of light, Kara said. Like we were eating eyes, and it made me able to see. That actually fits, Elvie said. It does, Fayez said. What does it fit into? Because I just learned a lot about light, and it was really weird. Elvie's smile wasn't annoyed at all, and Kara's was only a little. I think our sea slugs hit a milestone, Elvie said. They already had a method of exchanging information through direct physical transfer, like bacteria trading plasmids. If we're getting this right, they formed a mutualistic relationship, or successful parasitism, with a little goo cap that could go down to the volcanic vents and come back up. Oh, dirty, Fayez said, pulling himself fully into the room. With all three of them, it was a little tighter than comfort, but Kara grabbed the wall and made space for him. How did the eyeballs come into it? They harvested evolutionary innovations from the faster ecosystem. Something down by the vent figured out a rudimentary infrared eye so that it could navigate the vent. The slugs got it, put it on the signaling protein mechanism, and all of a sudden they didn't need to stick plasmids into each other to share information anymore. They could do infrared semaphore. No, it was light, Kara said. Maybe bioluminescence, Elvie agreed. At that point, the very slow things started being able to talk very, very fast. And they start looking a lot less like jellyfish and a lot more like free-floating neurons. Plus, we already see the deep strategy of sending out semi-biological runners to inhospitable biomes and implanting instruction sets into whatever life they find there. Which, I'm stretching here, starts sounding a lot like the Protomolecules mission on Phoebe. Her voice trailed off. Her smile shifted to something more rueful. But that's not what you came to talk about, is it? There's a briefing you should totally listen to. But no, Fayez said. I needed to talk about something else. Kara, could we take a quick break? The black eyes were still for a fraction of a second, then flickered up to Fayez and away. Sure, no problem. Kara pushed herself to the doorway and out into the corridor, closing the office door behind her as she went. Fayez drifted to the medical scanners. Kara's readouts were still on the screens. He traced the curve of her stress metabolites. He wouldn't have known what they were, except Elvie had explained them. They're not as high as they look, she said a little defensively. We don't even really know what the upper boundary is for someone who's been modified like her. I didn't know you were doing another dive today, Faya said. She felt up to it. That's not what you came for either, is it? He shut down the screens, rotated back to face Elvie, and braced on a foothold. The Tanaka thing is a problem. She had looked tired before he said it. She looked worse now. What are we seeing? She's reallocated and retasked 4 work groups. Instead of doing deep background scanning, they're searching for an artifact that may or may not have left from Laconia and doing deep brain scans of Trejo looking for, I don't know what. Traces of manipulation, Elvie said. Something that would show evidence that he'd had a direct neural link like the one James Holden and the remnants of Miller did on Illis. So, you know about this? Elvie made a vague, helpless gesture. She outranks me. But you're the administrator of the Science Directorate, and that used to matter, Elvie said. Not anymore. Right now, her orders might as well say, from the desk of God. These scientists want you to protect them from the bureaucracy. What they want is for me to talk Duarte into overriding Trejo and getting her clearance pulled, Elvie said. There's a problem with that plan. That Duarte doesn't exist? That Tanaka will need to find him before I can ask him any favors. Yes. Fayez was quiet for a moment. He didn't want to go to the next place, but he had to. Do you think that's really what's going on? Elvie's sigh meant she had the same thoughts and suspicions. You mean, do I think Tanaka's really searching for a version of Duarte that came out of his coma and disappeared? Or is Trejo feeding us a story and seeing if it leaks out to the underground? This could all be a test. Duarte could be back at the State Building right now, contemplating his oatmeal. We wouldn't know until Dr. Lee gets a quiet order to put a bullet in the backs of our heads. We're high in the food chain, but Trejo's still an authoritarian despot, and there's a lot of precedent for shit like that. I don't care about it, Elvie said. I can't play the game. I don't have the focus or the energy. You can stop feeding our results to Jim and Nagata. Elvie nodded, but not in the way that meant she agreed. Fayez pressed his fingertips into his closed eyelids. Babe, he said, but she stopped him. It's happening more than we thought. What? What's happening? The incidents. Like Gadara. We've only been seeing the near misses. We always catch the ones that turn off consciousness. But I had Ochida run through pattern matching for other anomalies like Gadara's lightspeed thing. They're happening all the time. What do you mean all the time? Fayez said. But his gut had gone suddenly cold. Changes in virtual particle annihilations in Patria, Felicité, and Kunlun systems. Lightspeed variations in Sumner and Farholm. Electron mass changed in Haza system for almost 2 minutes. Electron mass. Sanctuary system had gravity increase by 0.1% throughout the system for 6 seconds. Okay, every single thing you just said fucks me up. This was one 24-hour period. The things that are doing this are rattling all the windows looking for a way to make us die. And I don't know how we guard our physical fucking constants against attack. It's just a matter of time before they figure out how to trigger vacuum decay or something. So, I'm going to keep doing exactly everything I can, and yes, that means sharing data. Because if that's how we catch a break on this, it will be worth it. And if poor Dr. Lee needs to assassinate me because of it, at least it won't be my problem anymore. Okay, I get it. Trejo's fighting to hold on to an empire. I'm fighting to have something that's recognizable as the universe with living things in it. I get it, he said again. But now that she'd started, she couldn't stop. Not until the pressure was vented. If there's a chance, one chance in a billion for me to figure this out, I'm taking it. If there's a price that I have to pay, that's fine. Not even going to think about that. Just opening my wallet, and whatever the universe needs to take from me, it's welcome to. That's what we're playing for. So yes, I really, really hope that Duarte snapped out of his fugue state and ran off to do whatever the fuck half proto-molecule former emperors do in their retirement, because that would mean Trejo wasn't playing court intrigue games with me while I'm at work. But who knows? I don't. She went quiet, still shaking her head in a tight, angry motion. Fires steadied himself on the handhold. How do I help? Just keep doing what you're doing. Help me keep doing what I'm doing. Hope that we catch a break in time. All right, he said. Can do. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I do not accept your apology. You're right. I get it. She took his hand. She felt cold. Her skin was dry. She'd grown thin enough that he could feel the individual tendons shifting over her bones. I'm so sorry I pulled you into this. It's hellish, that's true, but the company's good. No one I'd rather face the end of everything with than you. It's because I have a cute ass, isn't it? That's my secret power. She managed to smile. You got me. I can crack a walnut with these cheeks, Fayez said. I mean, you wouldn't want to eat it afterwards, but I love you, she said. Stop cheering me up. Send Kara back. I need to get some work done. He found Kara in her quarters with Zan. They were floating together in the space between their bunks, with Zan chattering excitedly about something from his entertainment feeds. Kara's face was the polite boredom of older siblings throughout history. It was weirdly reassuring to see something normal, given their context. When Fayez cleared his throat, the pleasure on the girl's face was as clear as the disappointment on her brother's. Is Dr. Okoye ready? Kara asked, and there was a hunger in the question that left Fayez a little uncomfortable. He swallowed it. She is. Sorry I interrupted. Just had some stuff I needed to talk with her about. It's okay, Kara said, but I should go. Fayez pulled himself aside and let the girl haul herself out. As she floated down the corridor, he had one of those moments he had sometimes where his sense of balance tried to wake up. For just a moment, Kara wasn't floating away to the side, but falling head first down the hallway. He grabbed the handhold to steady himself, and after a few breaths, the feeling passed. Is something wrong? Zan asked. No, I'm never going to get used to living on the float. Spent my formative years down a gravity well, and some things are baked in. I've heard that, Zan said, then turned and touched the ceiling to press himself down toward the floor. It was hard to read his expression. The kid had been a little boy for several decades now, and between his child-stuck brain and the depth of his experience, he wasn't really one thing or the other. His sister was like that too. It was impossible to see them as children, and it was impossible not to. Zan's mag boots locked onto the deck, and he turned almost like he was walking in gravity. What about you? Fayez said. All well in your world? I'm worried about Kara, he said without hesitating. She keeps coming back different. Yeah? Different how? Changed, Zan said. The thing that's teaching her, it's making her too. The chill that ran through Fayez had nothing to do with temperature. He kept his tone light and jovial. What's it making her into, do you think? Zan shook his head. An I don't know motion. We'll find out, he said. Chapter 11. Teresa. At 15 years since the first permanent settlements, New Egypt was a younger colony system. It had 2 planets with large habitable areas. The school where she was going to live, like most of the other established settlements, was on the smaller of them, the 4th planet out from the sun. The planet, called Abbasia, had a little under 3/4 G and a 30-hour day. For reasons that hadn't been investigated in depth yet, the magnetosphere was very strong, which was important given the very active and frequent solar flares. Even near the equator, the auroras were supposed to be magnificent. The total population of the 2 planets together was less than the Laconian capital, and it was spread across half a dozen small cities and a score of mineral extraction sites. Only a third of Abbasia was covered by ocean, and most of the land surface was arid, though with extensive cloud forest analogues at upper elevations in both the northern and southern hemispheres. Sohag Presbyterian Academy was nestled in a river valley in the south, a few hundred kilometers from Nouvelle École, with which it cooperated academically. Sohag Presbyterian's grounds were a little under 1,000 hectares of terraformed soil and agricultural cultivars. The buildings had been designed by Alvaro Pio shortly before his death, and they were listed in the top 1,000 most significant architectural sites in the New Worlds. Teresa had looked at pictures of the campus filled with smiling young people her age and a little older. She tried to imagine herself among them, tried to imagine who she would be if she were in those images. This is going to be my home now, unless something goes wrong. And it seemed like something might be going wrong. The whole crew was gathered at a screen on the ops deck that showed the tactical display of the New Egypt system. Their focus, and so Teresa's focus too, was the ship that had just passed through the Ring Gate 6AU behind them, and was burning hard for Abbasia. I don't have it on any of the transit schedules from the underground, Naomi said. But that's exactly the problem. There isn't a single coordinated set of flight plans, and even if there were, people are smuggling all the time now. Nothing on the drive signature? Jim asked. Doesn't match anything in the records, Alex said. But that doesn't mean much either. Could be something that was built or had the drive swiped out at a shipyard in Baragaon or Oberon. There's more and more decent yards in the other systems, too. It's not like it was back when everything was just Sol system. I know, Jim said. Alex increased the size of the image, but the ship was still too small to make out, a black dot against the brightness of its drive plume. A few dozen meters of ceramic and carbon silicate lace as seen from almost 900 million kilometers. It was a miracle they could make out as much as they could. Chances are decent that it's coming through now is just coincidence. Yeah, Jim said in a voice that meant he disagreed. Amos crossed his thick arms over his chest and smiled. He wasn't smiling about anything. Teresa still thought of him as Timothy sometimes. Timothy always smiled, even when he'd been hiding in a cave. Jim hauled in a wide sigh and let it out again. But if it is a Laconian ship, it still probably wouldn't be tracking us, Naomi said. We've kept radio silence. We're not even passing data with the local repeater network. They'd have to know we were coming here. Probably it's what it looks like, Amos said. Freighter hauling freight. Or a pirate. Pirates are good too. It's not the chances that bother me, Jim said. It's the stakes. I don't want them tracking us down to the surface. I can make landfall when the site's on the far side of the planet, Alex said. Zip in, drop Teresa and the pup off, and get back above atmosphere before they'd see us taking off. Even if they're watching, they won't know where we went. Might not even know we landed at all. Teresa listened with a sensation growing in her belly. It was like a tightness, or a stone. It had a taste, too. She unbuckled herself from the crash couch and pulled herself down the lift. She wasn't sure where she was going, but the crew of the Rocinante talking through the details of how they were going to drop her off made staying in place unbearable. She passed by the galley to the crew quarters, including her own. She heard Muskrat bark an inquiry as she passed, but she didn't answer, just kept going down. The machine shop was as close to a safe and comfortable place as she had anymore. She had a list of tasks from Amos, and she pulled it up. It was time to check the water supply's chemical sensors. She'd never done it before, but the instructions were linked to the entry. She read them, gathered up the tools, and made her way to the tank feeds. Her jaw ached. She made herself stop, clenching her teeth. Travel between systems was slow. The Rocinante didn't have any of the breathable fluid crash couches that would let bodies sustain long, very high G burns. The duties that Amos assigned her to keep her engaged filled the gap that Illich and other tutors had left. And she clung to them now, not because she particularly enjoyed them, but because they were familiar. And because it felt like laying claim to something. She was about halfway done with a bubble of escaped water the size of her fist adhering to her arm when Amos pulled himself in beside her. He didn't say anything, just took a little hand vacuum and cleaned the spilled water off her wrist. He handed her tools when she needed them and stowed them for her when she didn't. It went faster with him there. In the end, she found that 2 sensors out of 60 were showing periodic faults, low-voltage shorts, harmless. And they could be down half the sensors and not really have to worry about water quality. She tagged both of them for replacement anyway. Amos's philosophy was to replace things before you needed to, not after. She found it a sensible rule. So, he said, this was back on Earth when I was younger than you are now. There was this guy I knew. His parents both OD'd the same night. Upside, he was a registered birth, so someone gave a shit. Downside, he got put into the foster system. It fucked him up pretty good. Abusive foster caregivers are a common issue in aggressively individualist social orders. I had a unit about civil service reform 2 years ago. We studied it. True. But that wasn't the only thing got him. He was one of those people that tried to put down roots, you know. Wherever he was, he'd find things and hold on to them. Put him in a new city for a week, and he'd already have a favorite park. That kind of shit. Only it was fostering, so every few months he'd lose it all again. Is this an uplifting story about how he found his real home inside himself? Amos went still for a moment the way he did, then looked chagrined. Actually, he got addicted to a bunch of home-brewed narcotics and slow-melted his nervous system. So, nah, not really. I was trying to say that you're not the only one who has a hard time letting go. Moving on to the next thing. I don't know. Thought it might help to hear that. What about you? I'm good wherever I am, he said. But getting to that point was unpleasant. You don't want to be like me. They were quiet for a moment. Her sleeve was still wet. It clung to her arm. I'm angry, she said. I know. I feel like he's throwing me away, putting me aside because I'm inconvenient. I hear you. It's like who I am and what I want don't even matter to him. I know that's crazy. Or at least I know it's overblown, but it's like I have a splinter I can't dig out. It's just right there on my nerve ending, and every time I even brush up against it, it hurts. Yeah. She sat still, feeling her blood pulse in her temple, her mind agitated. I'm not really mad at the captain, am I? This is about my father. This school thing could be good for you, Tiny. A lot healthier than hanging around an old warship with nobody your own age. But I like it here. You like me being here, right? No, Amos said. I didn't want you to stay. It felt like a punch in the gut. But, look, Tiny, I've watched a lot of people die. Some of them were my friends. I'm mostly okay with that now, but I ain't ready to watch you die. And if you stay here on this ship, you will. That's the kind of ship it is. That's what Jim said too, Teresa said. Yeah? Well, the two of us see a lot of things the same way. You seem very different to me. We are. You're going to be fighting for the fate of humanity. I'm going to be worrying about algebra assignments. Well, maybe you'll get lucky and we'll win and the algebra will matter. And 20, 30 years down the road, something else will show up to slaughter everyone and you can take care of that one. She didn't want to be crying. She didn't want to be sad. Amos leaned over and put a thick, ropey arm around her. He was strangely hot to the touch, like he was always running a fever. She leaned into him and wept anyway. She said her goodbyes to Alex and Naomi on the ship just after they touched down. They'd landed far enough away from the school that they wouldn't damage the grounds, so there was still a little walk from her old life to her new one. She tried not to think about that. It was easier if she could pretend that this wasn't the last time she would be on the ship, that she didn't have to start her life all over again. She just put one foot in front of the other, as if this particular walk didn't signify anything in particular. Jim and Amos went with her to make sure everything was all right, but she could tell their minds were more than half on the incoming ship. Like guards from the state building, they wore light body armor and sidearms. She just had a duffel bag with a couple of folded flight suits and a few days' supply of dog food. Muskrat trotted along with them, her brown, worried eyes shifting between Teresa and Amos. The sky was wide and blue, with cumulus clouds on the horizon. The valley opened before them, gentle curves of land that looked like erosion and wind and the growth of plants. The local plants were tall and thin, rising up into the air like 3-meter-high blades of blue-tinged grass. The breeze passing among them sounded like radio static. The school's grounds stood out from the world around it, straight lines and right angles. The air smelled like overheated metal. There weren't any people. Term doesn't start for another 2 weeks, Jim said. You're probably the first to arrive. Isn't it a boarding school? Teresa asked. They still have breaks between terms, don't they? Amos shrugged. Not a lot of private school types in my social circles. They know we're coming? Finley knows to expect us, but Naomi was keeping the radio silence thing pretty strict. In case. Sure, Amos said. The main path was crushed stone gravel, light gray with flashes of pink and blue and gold where the sunlight glittered off it. An earth mover stood idle at the side of the path. Its wide industrial treads had left marks behind it 1/2 meter across. The disturbed ground was dark and damp. The sun hadn't dried it yet. Amos smiled at nothing in particular, looking around like a tourist taking in the sights. Jim seemed tenser. They walked up the path to a central courtyard, 3 glass-windowed stories tall, with a canopy stretched between the buildings. A stone fountain had lines of mineral deposits that showed where the water would have flowed if it had been flowing. Teresa recognized it all from her reading about the school. The pale wood juxtaposed with the glass was apparently very interesting from an architectural perspective, but she just thought it looked awkward. The smiling kids and serious instructors that had filled the campus weren't there, though. Muskrat whined and pressed in against Teresa's leg. "Yeah, dog," Amos said, "putting my little hairs up too." The wide double doors of the main building 10 meters ahead of them swung open, and a woman stepped out. Her arms were out at her sides, her hands open and empty. She was tall, long-limbed and thin, with high cheekbones and dark eyes. Her skin looked as taut and tough as if she'd been carved out of wood. Teresa couldn't guess the woman's age, but she wore a Laconian Marine uniform. Jim muttered, "Fuck," to himself. "I'm unarmed," the woman said. Teresa recognized her tone. An officer's voice, brusque and carrying an expectation of obedience. Her father's palace had been filled with voices like it. "I'm no threat to you. You don't need to escalate." "What are you doing here?" Teresa said, loud enough to carry through the courtyard. "Do you know who I am?" Amos put a hand on her shoulder and gently pulled her half a step back. Jim's eyes were wide, and his face was bloodless. If his expression hadn't been so calm, she would have thought he was having a panic attack. "Yes, I know who you are," the woman said. "You're Teresa Duarte. I am Colonel Aliana Tanaka of the Laconian Marine Corps. And Captain Holden, if I'm not mistaken. I have to say that's a bit of a surprise. I'd have thought you'd have put her on a different ship. Eggs, baskets, you know." Jim stood silent, frozen. Oh, Teresa thought, he's about to have a panic attack. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Tanaka said. "I need the girl's help." "I'm here of my own free will," Teresa said. "If my father, at this point I am considerably better briefed about your father's condition than you are," Tanaka said. Amos reached down into his pocket, appearing to scratch idly at his leg while he looked up toward the canopy. Teresa heard a tiny, distant voice, Alex saying, "What's up, big guy?" "If we're all friends and just talking," Amos said, his voice loud enough to carry, "how come you got a fire team on the roof up there?" Teresa looked up. She wasn't certain, but there might have been shadows on the canopy. Her heart was tapping at her ribs like it wanted to get out. Muskrat whined, and she put a hand on the old dog's back. "He's right," Jim said, his voice steadier than Teresa expected. "That doesn't seem friendly." The woman didn't miss a beat. "You're correct. If I wanted to resolve this through violence, it would already be resolved. But I think we've all been through enough firefights to understand that when the bullets start flying, it gets very hard to be certain where they all end up. And I don't want anything to happen to the girl either." "Where's the head of the school?" Jim said. "The one who was meeting us." "She's safe. Honestly, I was hoping I'd find Teresa already here." "We didn't know we were inconveniencing you, or we'd have scheduled things differently," Jim said. Despite the casualness of his words, his voice was like a wire under so much tension it was about to snap. "In your position, I would have made getting her to safety a much higher priority. You can't imagine what a relief it is to discover I didn't waste my time coming out. You sure about that? Jim said. Wouldn't play with this one, Cap, Amos said softly. There was a dangerous buzz in his voice Teresa had only heard once before. Close your eyes, Tiny. You don't want to watch this. The last thing he'd said to her before he'd been killed. This isn't a fight either of us need to have, Tanaka said, taking a few slow steps forward. Her arms were still out to her sides, fingers splayed to emphasize the emptiness of her hands. I'm not looking to arrest you, Captain Holden, or your crew, or your ship. You're free to go. My mandate at present is very narrow. Teresa glanced over at Jim, and he looked back. While their gazes were still locked, he shouted, How do you know I won't open fire as soon as we don't have her? There was no reason for her to believe that Jim was bluffing. In the moment, Teresa was certain he would leave her with Tanaka, and relief complicated her fear. They didn't want to see her die. She understood that better now. She didn't want to see them die either. You have my word, Tanaka said. I was looking for something a little more solid. I don't have a habit of breaking faith. That's going to have to be enough. Jim looked away from Teresa, back to the woman. Amos had started humming softly and tunelessly. The shadows on the canopy were larger now, and more clearly shaped like Laconian power armor. Not sure that it is going to be enough, Jim said, but I'm willing to discuss other ways to make a handoff. You let us go back to our ship. Once we're in the airlock, we'll let the girl walk back by herself. Tanaka's smile was hard. Let me make a counter-offer. How about you do what I said, and no one dies? Jim tensed. He was on the edge of doing something stupid out of fear, and Tanaka was starting to escalate. Teresa had been trained in negotiation strategies, up to and including hostage situations. Jim was going to fuck this up. She had to take control. I'm a little tired of being talked about like I was luggage. This isn't a conversation between him and you. This is a conversation with me. I decide what ship I leave this place on, not him. Muskrat, sensing the tension, started barking and hopping on her front legs. Tanaka smiled, and it was cold. All right, Tanaka said. Please come with me. Do it now, and in return, I won't kill your friends. You don't have to do this, Jim said, quietly enough that it was just for her to hear it. Whatever happened, she would know that even now, having landed on this planet to get rid of her, he was still willing to die to protect her. The knot in her stomach was replaced by something warm and comforting. It had to be enough. I'll go, Teresa said. But no one heard her. Her voice was suddenly drowned out as the static hiss of the tree-sized grasses took on a deafening rumble. For a second, she thought of earthquakes or stampedes of cattle. Tanaka's neck worked. She was sub-vocalizing to someone. You have to the count of 3, Tanaka shouted. 1, Amos said, fuck it, stepped in front of Teresa, and drew his gun. Chapter 12. Tanaka. The girl was staring at her, arms crossed defiantly, so certain of her place in the natural order, comfortable with the absolute necessity of her existence. Tanaka had seen that attitude before in other people, many times. She'd also seen the surprise and hurt in their eyes as they died. Tanaka had no such illusions. Anyone could die at any time, and the universe didn't give a shit. So while the girl stood in front of her, shielded by nothing but the accident of having a powerful daddy, Tanaka wore an armored suit of woven carbon silicate lace that would stop anything short of a rocket launcher under her clothes. I'm a little tired of being talked about like I was luggage. This isn't a conversation between him and you. This is a conversation with me. I decide what ship I leave this place on, not him. Oh, little girl, Tanaka thought, you have no idea. It made her hands itch to have Duarte's daughter so close and not just grab her. A dozen quick steps and she'd have the girl, the escaped prisoner, and the terrorist who was apparently not dead despite having been shot in the head back on Laconia. But killing the kid had a lot of downside, and the risk wasn't zero. So instead, she smiled and spread her hands a little wider, trying to seem as non-threatening as possible. James Holden might be rounding the corner from middle age into old, but he was still dangerous. And the lump of gristle next to him that went by Amos Burton had more than one question mark next to him in her book. Tanaka didn't underestimate either of them. The dog started barking and bouncing up and down on its front paws. It wasn't a trained attack animal, just an old pet. She knew from the file the girl would be easier to control if they didn't kill it. We're all friends here, she smiled at them, willing it to be true. A large caliber pistol loaded with high explosive rounds pressed into the small of her back in case it turned out they weren't. Venom 1, a voice said in her ear. Check, check. Venom 2 at southwest corner. I've got Holden, came a different voice. Venom 4 northeast. I've got Bluto, said a third. 3 covering south. Tanaka smiled. Whatever happened from here in, her enemy was well and truly fucked. All right, Tanaka said to Teresa, playing for time. Please come with me. Do it now, and in return, I won't kill your friends. The girl looked uncertain. She'd never believe a threat made to her, not really. But threats to her friends, she believed. Her file made it clear she had significant abandonment issues. If things like that didn't make you strong, they made you weak. You hearing this? Venom 1 asked, his mic buzzing with background noise as he spoke. A distant rumble was growing, the tall, sword-like foliage whipping as something blasted toward them. The girl was talking, but whatever she was saying was drowned out by the noise. Sparrowhawk, Tanaka said, activating the bone mic in her jaw. Mugabu here. Rocinante is Oscar Mike, she said. On our way, Mugabu replied. He'd hidden her ship around the far side of the planet to avoid detection. She'd known that was a risk. She didn't regret it. Not yet, at least. I'll be to you in 20. Tanaka's gaze flickered across what was about to be a battlefield. She probably couldn't stall for 20. Forget me, she said to Mugabu. Stay on the Rocinante. Do not let it leave this planet with the girl on board. Are you authorizing force, even if the girl is on board? Tanaka didn't answer. She needed to get her hands on the target before the Rocinante showed up. She couldn't risk losing the girl if the situation went violent, and when her team moved on the 2 adults and the Sparrowhawk showed up overhead, things were liable to go very violent indeed. Out of time and out of options. Something like pleasure flowed through her. It was time for someone to make a decision. You have to the count of 3, Tanaka shouted at the girl as she beckoned. Come to me. 1. Burton shoved the girl behind him and pulled his gun. The Rocinante blasted into view, barely skimming the tops of the foliage, the powerful landing thrusters in her belly flattening everything it passed over. Tanaka found herself impressed by the recklessness of the maneuver. Here she was, working so hard not to put the girl in any danger, and the Rocinante crew was willing to throw a spaceship at her to keep her away. "Venom, take the girl," she shouted over the deafening sound of the ship, pulling her gun from behind her back in a smooth, practiced motion. Burton saw her do it, and drew down on her as he continued pushing the girl back toward the approaching ship. Tanaka dove behind a low stone planter box just as he fired, the bullet blowing a fountain of soil into the air. "Shots fired," one of her team said. 5mm caseless, low threat, someone else said, as flat and emotionless as if he were placing a lunch order. "They're firing at me," Tanaka shouted back. "Get the girl." "Free fire?" Venom 1, the team leader, asked. No shooting. Pull the other two apart with your hands if you need to, but do not risk firing toward the girl," Tanaka yelled, then peeked up over the planter box. Holden, Burton, and the girl were about 30 meters away now, still backing up. The Rocinante had taken up position about 250 meters farther away, still hovering on its landing jets. It would have to put down to let them board, but the pilot wasn't taking any chances. A metallic blue figure dropped into the courtyard between Tanaka and Holden, then darted toward the fleeing group in a blur. 3 more figures dropped from the canopy above, surrounding Holden and the girl. Burton pointed his gun at one and started firing. "Taking fire," Venom 2 reported. Her team moved toward the 3, not returning fire, but moving fast, aggressively. The old-style Martian Navy sidearms Holden and Burton carried would never penetrate a modern suit of Laconian power armor. They could fire their guns dry, and her team would just walk up and snap their necks. Quick, neat, almost no danger to the girl unless Burton shot her. But the old mechanic was careful and methodical as he fired. Every shot hit one of Tanaka's team, and he kept the girl behind him. Venom 3 was the closest, only a few meters from Holden, when the world exploded. A blinding flash and a concussion like someone had hit her in the chest. Tanaka dove back behind her planter box, her mind trying to make the detonation into her team having disobeyed orders, and opened fire. But the guns on the Laconian armor weren't that loud. Nothing was that loud. A quick look over the planter box told her that all 4 members of her team were down. No, not down. Literally blown apart. She could see the remains of Venom 2, an undifferentiated pile of meat and technology spread across a few meters of ground. In the distance, the barrels of the Rocinante's point defense cannons were fully extended and swiveling as they looked for new targets. PDC fire in atmosphere, with their own people between the ship and its target. If she'd had time to think about it, she'd have been impressed by the audacity. Tanaka jumped up to her feet and ran flat out toward one of the school buildings surrounding the courtyard, looking for cover. She imagined one of those PDC barrels snapping around with merciless machine speed to lock onto her. If it fired, she'd never hear the shots that ended her. Against a warship's PDC rounds, her fancy armored undersuit might as well be silk pajamas. She made it to the wall of the school building. The Rocinante, hovering on its maneuvering thrusts, was completely blocked from her line of sight. She didn't think a pilot who flew for James Holden would shoot through a school to get her. But she displaced to another nearby building anyway. Once the shooting had started, people could panic and do things they would never have imagined themselves doing otherwise. Better not to risk it. The roar of the ship's thrusters rose in pitch, then began to cycle down. The ship had landed. They'd blown her team apart, sent her running, and decided the coast was clear. The coast is decidedly not clear, motherfuckers. Tanaka sprinted out from behind the building and into the tall native grass. She ran parallel to the path Holden and the crew were taking toward the ship, staying far enough away to hopefully hide the sound of her movement. If anyone could still hear anything after the ear-shattering blast of the Rocinante's PDCs firing in atmosphere. Even if they caught something on thermals, they might think twice about accidentally shooting a bystander. Might. They were a pretty fucking reckless bunch. She was going to enjoy taking them down. After 30 meters, she slowed down and angled in toward the three fleeing shapes. She was still a dozen meters away from them when she caught a glimpse of Holden in his dark Martian armor heading toward the ship. He wasn't looking in her direction. Through the ringing in her ears, she was almost certain she could hear the dog barking, so the girl had to be nearby. Tanaka angled away and put on more speed, staying low but getting ahead of them. The surface of the tall native grass was covered in tiny hooks that tugged at her clothes when she brushed against them. When she accidentally hit one with the back of her hand, it left a painful abrasion, like a rug burn. She ignored it. She had the scent of blood, and her prey was just a few meters away. When Tanaka felt she'd gotten far enough ahead of them, she moved back to the edge of the grass and waited. The ship had gone quiet. The grass hummed its white noise around her. From further down the path, the dog was barking. She heard Holden's voice. "Hurry! They'll have backup coming." They were a dozen meters or so away and moving toward her. They were trotting, but she'd been faster, one step ahead. Tanaka stepped out of the grass, leveling her pistol at Holden. The look of surprise on his face would have been comical in any other context. The girl shrieked with alarm and grabbed at her dog's collar as it barked furiously. "I can't let you leave with that girl." Holden had his gun in his hand, but it was down at his side. He shifted his weight like he was going to make a move, but Tanaka just shook her head at him and pointed her gun at his face. "If I spray you all over that girl, she'll panic. If she runs, things get even less predictable than this. No one wants that." Holden nodded and dropped the pistol. Then his gaze shifted to Tanaka's left shoulder. "Wait," she said. "Where's—" "Right here," said a deep voice from behind her. Shit. She was one step behind. She was already swiveling to bring her gun to bear before the second word was out. Something heavy slammed into the side of her head and sent her spinning to the ground. Amos Burton stepped out of the grass, his hands balled up into fists. "Hi," he said, moving toward her. The hit was solid, jaw to inner ear. Her world was swimming. Tanaka rolled away and found her gun on the ground. She was bringing it up when Burton's boot connected with her forearm and sent the pistol flying off into the grass. "What are you doing?" Holden asked. "I'm getting my ass kicked," Tanaka thought, dazed enough to wonder why he was speaking to her. "I think we might want to talk to this one," Burton said. "Let's take her with us." Tanaka said, "No," and tried to stand, then let herself collapse again. "Look how hurt I am." It was only half bullshit. "Hurry up," Holden said, and started to lead the girl past her. Burton reached down to grab Tanaka's arm and yank her to her feet. He was very strong. That was good. It would make him overconfident. Tanaka let him pull her up, pushing hard with her legs as she rose, and snapping her other arm up to drive her palm into the underside of the big man's chin. His head jerked back from the impact, but his grip on her left bicep didn't loosen. He raised his other arm and threw a massive fist at her face. With his hand gripping her, she couldn't dodge, so she whipped her head to the right and slapped at the punch, shoving it to the left. It still grazed her cheek, and the impact was enough to make that side of her face go numb. The motion brought him in closer, and Tanaka threw herself backward, letting the momentum of the punch and her own weight yank Burton off his feet and on top of her as she fell. He let go of her arm, trying by reflex to catch himself, and they both hit the ground. He landed on her like a falling tree, driving the air from her lungs. She was ready for it, though, and threw up an elbow that caught Burton in the throat as he dropped. He made a sound like an injured duck and rolled away, clutching at his neck. Tanaka bounced to her feet and looked for the girl. The swimming world whirled around her. She gritted her teeth and ignored it. The girl was hiding behind Holden, clutching at her dog and staring at the melee, her mouth a round O of surprise. He was digging around at his feet, trying to pick up his dropped gun. Tanaka could see hers lying in the grass not too far away. Diving for it to take a rushed shot at Holden would be risky with the girl so close by. She raised a hand instead. "Holden, wait!" "Leave him out of it," Burton said behind her. "We're not done yet." Tanaka spun on the ball of her foot and lashed out with a kick at the spot the sound was coming from. The big mechanic casually swatted it away. He looked none the worse for wear after the throat strike that would have killed most people. Something was wrong with his eyes. They were flat black. She remembered reading about someone with eyes like that. She didn't remember who. "I've read your file," Tanaka said, backing toward Holden and the girl. She didn't have time for a boxing match with a strange-looking man with the eerie black eyes. Not when her best shots didn't seem to even faze him. "Yeah?" he asked, moving toward her. "It said we killed you," she said. "Any other time I'd stay to figure that out." The girl was so close that if she could just get her balance, she could take 2 steps, grab her, and be running before the others knew what had happened. Tanaka would place bets they wouldn't shoot at her if she had the kid in her arms. "You've got time," Burton said. Tanaka turned toward the girl and then stopped short. Holden was standing in front of her, his gun in his hand. The eyes that had seemed frightened a moment ago were now flat, emotionless, cold. "That's bad." "No," he said. "She doesn't." Before Tanaka could even start to move, Holden's gun went off 3 times. She felt the 3 shots as hammer blows to her sternum. All 3 center mass, kill shots. She hadn't been certain until that moment that he had it in him. Tanaka staggered 2 steps toward the edge of the path and then collapsed on her face. The 3 slugs from Holden's gun pressed into her chest where the nanofiber undershirt had caught them, like daggers in the deep tissue bruise they'd left in her flesh. She ignored the pain and lay very still, holding her breath. "Shit, Cap," Burton was saying. "I think we should have kept her." "We have to go. We have to get out of here, now," Holden replied. He sounded angry. Based on her reading of his file, Tanaka would have bet he wasn't mad at the mechanic. He was angry he'd been forced to shoot someone. For all the shit he'd seen, the Laconian interrogator's psych evaluation said that Holden had never really grown comfortable with violence. "Don't come check my body," Tanaka willed at them. "Let's get out of here before more of them show up," Holden said. And the 3 of them started walking away. Moving as little as possible, Tanaka inched toward her gun. When she was able to put her right hand on it, she risked turning her head to see where they were. Holden and Burton were side by side, the girl between them. They were about 40 meters away. Not a very long shot, not for her. They were both wearing old Martian light body armor. The high explosive rounds in her pistol would go right through it. There was some risk of fragmentation hitting the girl, but it wasn't likely to be fatal. And fuck it, a little bruising might do the bitch some good. Tanaka rolled onto her back and sat up. She aimed at Burton's back. He was the more dangerous of the two. Kill him first. She lined up her sights between the big man's shoulder blades, took a long breath, let half of it out, and pulled the trigger. The round slammed into his back and blew out his chest like someone had swapped his heart with a grenade. Tanaka shifted her aim to Holden, who was already spinning, gun in hand. The big man took a couple more steps and fell over. She lined up on Holden's chest, then jerked her head as something cut a groove across her scalp. The report of the gunshot arrived a split second later. He figured out the body armor, Tanaka thought. He's taking the headshot. She moved, scrambling for cover in the grass and trying to line up her next shot. Holden was standing still, pivoting slowly at the waist to put his sights on her. It was a race now, and she was sighted in on his head, ready to pull the trigger and end it, when someone slammed a sledgehammer into her cheek. The other side of her mouth exploded out. The pain barely lasted long enough to notice, and everything was gone. Interlude: The Dreamer. The dreamer dreams, and her dream carries her deeper into intimacy with vastness. All through the wideness and flow, she sparkles, and the sparkles become thought where there was no thought before. The great slowness remains, soft and wide as the icy cold and all-encompassing sea, and the slowness, drifting, languid, shuffles and reshuffles itself. The sticky and the slippery, the bright and the dark, the moving and the moving, for there is no true stillness in the spark-filled substrate, and the sparks become a mind. The dreamer dreams, and others dream with her, not just the ones at her side, not just the bubbles of salt, but the dance that they make. She dreams the dance, and the dance dreams her back. Hello, hello, hello. Once and gone so far away, there were only the first thoughts to think it. The it was like this: the ball at the center of down, and the shell at the center of up, and between them, the slow dancers and the sudden dance. Watch, 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 the grandmothers whisper, and their voices become a chorus, and the chorus says something else. The dance wants, and it pushes to the edges of everything, the skin of the universe. The dreamer dreams the dance, and the dance dreams, and its dreams become things, and the things change the dreams. Desire and longing for desire bumble over-eager forward and make new things to dance with. A brain growing the wires that form itself, thoughts flow from one substrate to another, and the great curiosity spins and makes and spins and learns. It presses down into the heat at the bottom of everything. It presses up into the cold, and it cracks the vault of heaven. The cold and hard of up yields to the dance, and the lights that they are meet lights that they are not. A new thing has happened. Light from elsewhere. The bright singing voice of God, inviting and inviting and inviting. The kick from behind blows through, carrying blood and bone and breath with it. The dreamer takes a step, and then another, and then falls, shrieking, and the grandmothers say, "No, not that. Over here, over here. Look at what came next." Death floods toward her, emptier than darkness. And the dreamer forgets, grabs for the brother who was always at her side, except not here, except not here. And the other one is, pocked voice and funereal. "It's all right. It isn't you. I've got you." She floats up, faster than bubbles, the heat below and behind, the cold cracked open to the stars, and screaming she launches up and out of the dream and into the body that is only hers, in a confusion of vomit and weep and a fading deeper than dreams could be. What the fuck was that? Chapter 13. Jim. Amos was limp, his dark eyes closed. His mouth hung open, and his lips were white. The hole in his back was about as big as a thumb. The one coming out his chest was wider than two fists together. The black meat of his flesh made the pale bone of his spine look like a worm someone had pulled apart. "We have to go," Teresa said from very far away. She pulled at his sleeve. "Jim, we have to go." He turned to look at her, her impatient scowl, her hair pulled back over her ears. Muskrat at her side was dancing on anxious paws and whining. Or maybe that was him. He tried to say, "All right," but realized he was about to vomit just in time to turn away. "We have to go," he thought. "Come on, pull it together." He went to Amos, putting his arms under the big man's knees and across his wide shoulders. On Earth, he'd never have been able to lift him. With a 3/4 G of a bacia, he was heavy but manageable. Man, girl, dog, and corpse, they started running toward the Rocinante. Jim tried to yell, "Hurry!" but the thing that had clenched up in his chest when he saw Amos blown apart wouldn't let him. He didn't look back. His peripheral vision started to narrow, like they were running down a tunnel that was slowly squeezing closed. He had to get to the ship. A wash of cold and wet stuck his clothes to his belly and his thighs, Amos's black blood spilling down him. Ahead of them, the airlock opened. Alex was in it, a rifle in one hand, waving them forward. The dog reached the lock first, misjudging the gravity and skittering against the hull. Teresa grabbed Muskrat around the middle and climbed the ladder with her. The weight of Amos's body slowed Jim down, but Alex reached out to help with the last couple steps. Jim knelt, lowering the corpse to the deck. The eyelids had opened a slit during the run, and the eyes beneath focused on nothing. Jim closed them. "Fuck," Alex said. "What the fuck?" "Take off now." "All right," Alex said. "Let's get stowed and we'll—" Jim shook his head and opened a connection to Naomi. "We're in. Get us up." "Are you in a couch?" "No, so don't bounce us around too much, but get us out of here." She didn't argue. The roar of the maneuvering thrusters rattled his teeth. He took Teresa by the shoulder, pulling her close to shout in her ear, "Get the dog to her couch and strap yourself in. I don't know how bad this is going to get." She looked at him with an equanimity he couldn't feel. She was hurt, frightened, traumatized. She was a kid. How could she stand to see what she'd seen? How could he? "He isn't secured," she said. "He won't care. Go." The deck lurched under them, shifting slowly as the ship went from belly down to the usual engine down orientation. Muskrat followed, and Teresa took her by the collar, leading her away. Amos's body shifted and rolled. There was horror in Alex's eyes, and Jim felt a rush of anger. The distress in his old friend's eyes was too much. If he tried to comfort Alex, it would be too much. He was shaking as it was, and he didn't know if it was the vibration of the ship carving its way through the atmosphere or his own body betraying him. Maybe both. "We have to get to ops," Jim shouted. Alex took a step toward the spent clay that had been Amos, then caught himself, and they made their rocking, unsteady way toward the central lift. The deck shook and plunged under them as they went from handhold to handhold. Thrust gravity and the pull of the planet made his knees and spine ache, his vision dark. He found himself on the edge of confusion, unsure for a moment whether they were fleeing New Egypt or Laconia. When they reached the lift, he sat down to keep from passing out. His mind pieced itself together as they rose. Alex squatted beside him. "You okay?" "They were there waiting for us. They knew we were coming." "I'm sorry," Alex said. "I should have been there." "She shot Amos in the back. Shot him in the back as we ran." Alex was quiet, because there wasn't anything to say. Jim looked at his flight suit, smeared black from the gut to the knees. His hands were stained black too, but it still smelled like blood. The lift pushed up, deck by deck. When they got to ops, Jim either had himself back together or he was fully dissociated. It was hard to know which. The ride smoothed out as they reached the upper atmosphere. The winds were screaming past them, but with so little mass to the air that a ripping 500-kilometer-per-hour current deflected them less than a breeze. The deck felt steadier under his feet. Naomi was in a couch, the flight controls on her screen. She glanced over as he lowered himself into the crash couch beside hers. He saw her register the blood, and whose it was. "Amos?" she asked. He shook his head, not meaning that it wasn't. Meaning, not now. He knew she understood. Alex went up to the flight deck, his rifle still bouncing against his shoulder. "I'm taking the stick," he shouted down moments later. "Copy that," Naomi replied. "I'm fire control." The screen before her shifted to status readouts on the ship's guns, PDCs, torpedoes, the keel-mounted railgun. Jim pulled up tactical. On this screen, an augmented map of Abbasia below them filled one side, a schematic of the nearby space of New Egypt's system on the other. And a sliver of red marked something the Rosie's threat detection thought he should be alarmed about. A stone in his chest. He selected it and pulled up the ship identification. "We've got company," Alex shouted from above. "I've got them," Jim answered. Naomi's voice was sharp and matter-of-fact, the way it always was in the teeth of crisis. "Is it a storm?" Jim looked at the analysis. Now that there was only one Magnetar-class ship left, stuck in Laconia guarding their home world, the Storm-class destroyers were the backbone of Laconian power. And even one would be more than a match for the Rosie. But this was smaller, with a squat, broad design and a drive cone that promised it was built for speed. "No," he said, "smaller. Maybe an Explorer. I don't know." "Well, it's coming our way," Alex said, "and it looks pissed." "Can we keep the planet between us and them?" "If I put us on a low, fast orbit, maybe for a little while. Long term? No. Give me a little while, then." Naomi didn't speak, but she cycled through the PDC status checks. If it was a shooting war, they'd be as ready as a lone ship could be. Jim's first impulse was to turn their back to the sun and burn as hard as they could stand it toward the ring gate and out of the system. It wouldn't work. The Laconian ship was made to be faster. And if they wanted to race her, their best move was to punch a hole in the Rosie's drive cone and force a shutdown then board and take her at their leisure. Turning tail and running would just make the shot easier. The alternative was to make it hard. He closed his eyes. There was only one next step that he could think of, and he hated it. His mind shifted and slipped, looking for a better idea. Jim, Alex said. You're 1 hour's about up. What's the play? Fuck, he thought. Keep our nose pointed at them. Make it so they have to put a hole through every deck in the ship to hit the drive. Naomi and Alex were silent for a moment, then Alex said, I'm on it. The distant sound of the thrusters was totally different from the earlier roar. The shift of the crash couch felt almost gentle. Naomi nodded and checked the power status on the railgun. Funny. You were saying before that the human shield thing made you uncomfortable. I've moved past uncomfortable to furious. She nodded her agreement. Then the screen lit up as the tight beam request was accepted. A man's face appeared on the screen, broad with round cheeks, dark skin, and a full and well-groomed mustache. He was wearing the blue uniform of Laconia with a captain's rank. He nodded at the camera, as calm as if they were in line together at the commissary. Captain Holden, I am Captain Noel Mugabo of the Sparrowhawk. Please return to the planet's surface. I mean you and your crew, no harm. You people just put a bullet through my mechanic, Jim said, and Naomi stiffened. And you killed 4 Laconian Marines, the captain said. I'm here to help us both de-escalate. My orders are to keep you here. We need Teresa Duarte's assistance, and for that, she must come with us. We will not hurt her, nor will we detain you. I don't believe you. Your doubt doesn't change our situation. Jim noticed the way the man said, our situation, building rapport, making it harder to pull the trigger, but also not backing down a centimeter. He'd had conversations like this as a prisoner on Laconia. Please return to the planet's surface, and we will take care of all this without any more violence. His crash couch put up a low-grade medical alert. His blood pressure and heart rate were concerning. Not dangerous, but not dangerous. He turned off the alerts. No, Jim said. I think we both know that's not going to happen. Alex called down from the flight deck. They're getting closer. Want me to break orbit? Jim muted his mic. Not yet. What alternative do you suggest? Captain Mugabo asked. I am open to discussing this. I propose you land so we know you're not a threat. Then we leave. With the girl. May I have a moment to consult with my superior? Jim nodded, and Mugabo's eyes shifted down as if he were sending a text-only message. Jim pulled up a tactical window. The 2 ships, whipping around the planet in a low orbit, pointed dead on at each other like gunmen in a cheap entertainment feed. He didn't know what sorts of weapons the Sparrowhawk carried, but he knew for a fact they were all pointed at him right now. Another window appeared. Fire control, with the railgun charged and ready. The Laconian ship locked in with passive targeting, so that it wouldn't seem like an escalation. He glanced over to Naomi. She mouthed the words, if you need it. He nodded. All right, Mugabo said. I accept your terms. What? We both value the life of the girl. If we have to continue this negotiation another time, so be it. You can go. Jim took 2 long breaths. You're not beginning a deorbit burn. Did you expect me to? I don't think you're telling me the truth, Jim said. I think if I fire the maneuvering thrusters, start to turn a little bit, you'll send a round through my drive cone. I think the only reason you haven't already done it is that you'd have to shoot through the whole ship to do it, and the risk to Teresa Duarte is too high. I assure you that is not the case. Mugabo said. Then you go first. If we're free to leave, begin your descent. When I see you touch down, I'll know you were telling the truth. Yes, Mugabo said. Of course. I very much understand your position. You're playing for time. I understand why you would feel that way, Captain Holden. Please believe me that we mean you and your crew no harm, and that my offer is sincere. The tactical screen bloomed at the same moment that Naomi's calm voice reached him. Fast movers. They've launched torpedoes. Radar tracked the pair of torpedoes as they arced out away from the Sparrowhawk. Mugabo had been buying time while his people locked in a firing solution that sent the torpedoes out and around to the Rosie to arc back in and hit her from behind, take out the drive, and leave the rest of the ship intact. Jim tapped the fire control, and the Rocinante dropped away beneath him for a fraction of a second as a 2-kilo tungsten slug spat out toward the enemy without the main drive on to compensate for the kick. Mugabo vanished, the tight beam connection lost. The rolling, deep chatter of the PDCs vibrated through the ship. One of the torpedoes blinked off his board. I'm lining up another shot, Alex said. The railgun showed ready. The other missile blinked off the board. The Rosie squealed a warning at them as 2 more torpedoes locked on. They're getting ready to launch again, Jim said. I've got the reactors set to dump core if the Rosie thinks we're out of luck, Naomi said. Alex? The railgun locked onto the Sparrowhawk a second time and fired without Jim's having to clear it. I think you got him, Alex said. Jim switched to the external telescopes. The Sparrowhawk was where it had been, curving around the planet toward them, its orbit unchanged. But now a cloud of gas and water vapor sprayed out of the ship along one side. The lock-on tone died as the Sparrowhawk's torpedoes failed to fire. They may be playing dead, Naomi said. Alex, keep the railgun trained on them. Copy that. A tiny suggestion of up and down came, shifting the couches on their gimbals as Alex adjusted the ship's orbit to keep the Sparrowhawk lined up in their sights. No new lock-on warnings sounded. No active radar bounced off their hull. Jim pulled up the comms again, tried the tight beam connection without knowing exactly what he'd say if Mugabo answered. He didn't. The Laconian ship drifted on its low, fast orbit. Either the Laconian ship would repair itself, or in another few weeks it would fall back down into the planet's gravity well and burn up like a meteor. Or it was only playing dead, waiting for Jim to declare victory, turn the ship, and catch a railgun round through its drive. Alex, he said, pull us back on maneuvering thrusters. If they don't turn to match, turn us and let's break orbit. Get out of here. Copy that, Alex said, and the Rosie shifted under Jim. They moved gently, slowly, waiting for the alarms that would mean the Sparrowhawk had only been playing dead. The alarms didn't come. So what now? Alex said. Now we plot the fastest way back through the ring gate and out of here. Any thoughts on where to? Alex asked. Firdos is on the flight plan, but freehold, Naomi said, her voice calm and authoritative. We needed resupply before, and we're burning through a lot of reaction mass on the maneuvering thrusters. And I wouldn't mind being under protection of one of our own while we figure out how this went pear-shaped. Yeah, Alex said, his voice grim. This kindness of strangers thing isn't going so well for us. Jim heard Naomi's restraints clattering free, and he felt her coming close. She stroked his hair, and he took her hand, kissing her fingers gently. That went very bad, she said. Yeah. She waited a moment before she said, "What happened to Amos?" Jim shook his head. "We lost him." He tried to say, "I lost him." "Yeah," Amos said. "I got pretty fucked up, all right." He stepped in from the lift, his shredded flight suit as wet and black as if he'd poured ink on it. The exit wound on his chest was pale flesh around a flat circle of onyx. When he smiled, it seemed tentative. Naomi's expression went empty. "Hey, Cat, we got Tiny back safe, didn't we?" It took a moment to understand this was really happening, but then Jim said, "Yeah, we did." "And the dog?" "Her too." Amos stepped into the ops deck and lowered himself onto an empty crash couch, grunting like he was sore. "Good. Tiny really likes that dog. There's a hell of a mess in the airlock. I'll get it cleaned up, but I gotta get some food first. I'm really hungry." Alex, drawn by the sound of Amos's voice, came down from the flight deck. His face was pale. "Amos?" "Hey," the big man said, lifting a hand in greeting. "I think I must have took kind of a hit down there. I'm missing some of what happened." Jim wanted to feel joy, and he did. But there was something more with it. A sense of wrongness that came from trauma after trauma, followed by something that violated his inborn sense of how the universe worked, what was possible. "You died," he said. "You took a round to the back and it blew most of your chest out. I saw your spine. It was in pieces." Amos went still in that unnerving way he sometimes did, and then frowned, nodded. "Yeah, okay. I think I knew that part." Jim laughed, and it was disbelief, and maybe relief, and something else he couldn't put a name to. "Is there anything that kills you anymore?" "Pretty sure I'm starving to death," Amos said. "Well," Alex said, "God damn." Naomi still hadn't spoken. Amos touched the black circle of his wound, exploring it. It didn't look like skin anymore. Whatever it was what Amos's resurrected corpse made when it replaced his injured flesh. Jim wondered what the inside of the wound looked like. For the first time, it occurred to him that the changes the drones on Laconia had made to his old friend hadn't stopped when they escaped the planet. Amos hadn't become something different. He was in an ongoing process of becoming. Something about the idea was chilling. As if Amos had read Jim's thoughts, he frowned. "I don't know how this whole thing works, but we'd be better off not doing it too often." Chapter 14, Elvie. Elvie missed gravity. She wanted to be able to sit by Kara's medical bay and feel the weight of her exhaustion bearing her down. The long, slight stretch along the back of her neck when her head hung forward. The heaviness in her arms and legs. She understood intellectually that she was near collapse, but the familiar somatic cues weren't there on the float. The only one that seemed to remain was the trembling in her large muscles, and by itself that felt like fear. Kara was strapped into the bay with wide, white bands that kept her from drifting. Her eyes were closed, her mouth relaxed and slightly open. Her lips were pale and bloodless as carved wax, with the tips of white teeth and a dark purple tongue behind them. Her breathing was deep, steady and slow. Sedatives still worked on her and Zan, despite the changes that the repair drones had made to their bodies. The drugs did metabolize faster, But that was fine. Their supplies were ample. The autodock was custom built with decades of Cortázar's observations of Kara's and Zan's baselines. The screens were crowded with real-time blood analysis and neural activity profiles as the system tried to match Kara now with Kara where she usually was and look for ways to bring those two data sets together. A standard bed would have been baffled, but this one showed Kara slowly returning to her standard range of function as Elvie watched and drank tea from a bulb and trembled. They'd been in the middle of another dive, sifting through the hallucinatory sensations and inhuman memories for pieces to the puzzle of how the gates had been built and if they could be made safe. Elvie was fairly sure they'd reached the part of the alien species development where they'd become aware of a broader universe beyond the ice shell of their world. She'd expected Kara to get there, and that it would open the door to some of the practical answers they needed. But then, Kara had started screaming that she'd been shot, or, if not her, that someone had. The monitors had spiked, and her brain activity lit up like someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail into her mind. They had restrained the panic, Hashan Lee barking the steps of the shutdown checklist over Kara's screams and vomiting. By the time they'd shut the drive down, Kara had lost consciousness. She hadn't regained it until now. Kara's lips moved, and she swallowed. Her eyes shifted under closed lids, and then opened. Black on black, Kara's gaze found her, and the girl tried out a weak smile. "Hey, Doc. Welcome back," Elvie said. "How are you feeling?" Kara paused, but it wasn't one of the eerie, alien, frozen moments. It only seemed like she was trying to find the right answer to a difficult question. "Wrung out. I've never been drunk, but maybe hungover. This feels like what a hangover's supposed to feel like." "Extrapolating from the literature," Elvie said, taking Kara's hand. It felt fever hot. "Something like that. Do you remember what happened? What went wrong?" "It wasn't the grandmothers, I don't think," Kara said. "They felt the same as always. Deeper, maybe, but the same. It was one of the others." "All right. Tell me about that." Kara frowned and shook her head the way she did when she was searching for some very precise word. "I'm not just myself when I'm in there. I mean, I am, but I'm not just Kara. There's more of me? Like the aliens? No, like me watching the aliens. I feel aliens too, but that's like I'm watching a feed, seeing something that's already recorded. These others are like being everyone in the room who's watching. Like the connection you have with Zan. Yes, but more. There are more of them. Only I think something happened. Something bad. I don't know if they died. And then another one of me was trying to calm me down." Kara's eyes went wide, and her grip on Elvie's hand squeezed hard enough to hurt. "Zan? Is he all right?" "Fine," Elvie said, not flinching. "He's worried about you, but that's all. He was in the isolation chamber when it happened, and it didn't seem to affect him one way or the other." Kara relaxed. Okay, all right, that's good then." She took a breath, settled into herself. "I saw them see stars for the first time. We don't have to do a debriefing now. You can rest first. Let's talk a little, please, while it's still fresh in my head." Elvie felt a little wave of pleasure, then guilt at the pleasure. "Only a little. Then you rest." Kara settled into herself. remembering the memories of others. There was a joy in her when she did. Or no, that was wrong. Not joy, but a relief. Like Elvie was pouring cool water over a burn. They were changing. The sea slugs or jellyfish or whatever. They were taking other bits of life, animals or plants or whatever was down at the hot core of that icy cold world. They sent them down into the vents so that they could change. Or it could change. That's been a consistent point. And judging from how the protomolecule functioned, they kept that strategy for a long, long time, Elvie said. But Kara wasn't listening. Her voice had a faraway, almost dreamy quality. The important thing was the light. You were saying that. I'm thinking that was the creation of mind. A hive mind. Elvie shrugged. I've never understood that term, really. I mean, there was an electrochemical structure with a lot of semi-independent bodies. Describe it like that, and we're hive minds of neurons. But did it find a way to build an emergent cognitive analogical system? Yeah, I think so. And when they saw the stars, it was like hearing God talking in a language you could almost understand, but not quite. The BFE wanted to show me more. It didn't want me, us, whatever, to go. I was trying to hold on. And then the thing happened, and if they weren't Zan, I don't know who they were, but they feel right when I'm in there. Kara let go of Elvie's hand. She focused on something Elvie couldn't see, like she was hearing music that only played for her. Don't worry about it, Elvie said. Not for now. We'll have plenty of time for the full debrief after you've rested. I'm going to let the team know you're all right, and Dr. Sanders wants to come by and make sure you're solid. Once we hear what he has to say, we'll make some plans for moving forward. I don't want to wait. I want to go back in. Elvie took a sip of her tea. I want that too. But right now, rest. Kara nodded and closed her eyes. Elvie waited until she was sure Kara had fallen asleep before she slipped out of the bracing on the foothold and pushed herself toward the door. Kara spoke at once, her voice perfectly lucid and awake, not slurred at all. Can Zan come see me? Of course, if you want. He does, Kara said, and lapsed back into silence. Elvie left the medical bay. Around her, the Falcon was subdued. The crew that ran the ship and the scientific staff that worked in it all knew what had happened, and their unease made for widespread conversations in the corridors and hallways, tight mouths and hunched shoulders. Elvie made her way to the ops deck, forcing herself to smile and nod and greet people. She hoped she was being a good leader and projecting optimism. She was afraid that she just seemed fake. Harshan Lee was in ops, reviewing the data set from Kara's aborted dive. She moved beside him, looking over his shoulder. He shifted to the side, giving her a better view. She says there was someone else in there with her, Elvie said. Hallucinogenic presences are very common. It can be induced with a few magnetic impulses to the temporoparietal region of the right lobe. Of course, we weren't doing that, Elvie said. That doesn't mean something else wasn't. Or maybe her right temporoparietal region was firing off because someone was in there with her. Sometimes you see your grandmother because you're dreaming. Sometimes you see her because you're at Grandma's house. It is a conundrum, Lee said dryly. Then, may I touch on a less pleasant subject? Elvie didn't say no. Lee took it as consent. I don't mean to step out of my place, but I think we're starting to have a morale issue with the crew. I was hoping you'd consider making an address. What kind of issue? He shook his head, like he was apologizing for his own words, and he kept his voice low. We are the only ship in a solar system. Half a dozen tight beam boosters, a couple of repeaters at the ring, gate itself, and an alien artifact big enough that if we stood on it, the gravity would crush us. That's all there is. There isn't even a dust cloud we could mine for ice. Are we short on supplies? No. But when something odd happens with the research protocol, there is a kind of multiplier. It reminds us just how tenuous our position is here. If the water recycler broke down in a way we couldn't fix, it would be a long, hard burn getting someplace that could give us aid before we died of thirst, and we might not make it. If it was the air recycler, we'd die. There is no one who can reroute to our aid. We all understood that when we began the mission, but some days we understand it more clearly than others, if you see what I mean. She reminded herself again that the vibration in her body wasn't fear. She was just tired, with one critical thing more that she needed to do. Of course, I'll address the crew. Just let me think about what to say. And thank you for bringing this to me. Of course, Doctor. She hadn't started in physics. It was possible to spend a whole lifetime in the biological sciences and only have a nodding acquaintance with pure physics. It wasn't possible to be the head of the Laconian Science Directorate without getting her feet wet, if wet meant abstract high-energy physical dynamics. One of the things she'd known without fully appreciating was that the second law of thermodynamics was the only one that cared about the direction of time. The heat death of the universe had mostly been a joke about how long her thesis was taking. The idea that heat was intimately related to time hadn't seemed strange, and some aspects of the high weirdness of the alien rings had escaped her. The man on her wall screen was David Trujillo, and at 4 hours into his presentation, 3.5 of which had been a careful and painstaking walk through a forest of explanations and justifications for which mathematical techniques his team had used in interpreting the data, he was getting to the phase she thought of as dumbing down for the biologist. The key is the difference between the reactions provoked by the magnetic field generator in Sol system and the lack of provoked response in the ring space itself. We've been aware of the energetic amplification effect of ring gate technology. For example, energy sent into the ring station causes a release of high-energy particles through the gates, and the energy of this release is orders of magnitude greater than the initiating event. This asymmetry was exploited in the design of the field generator. The assumption was that this was a borrowing of energy from someplace else within complex local space-time. If, as these results suggest, that's not accurate, and if the ring gate space is a bounded membrane within an a-local, a-contiguous space-time... Is he saying something? Fayez asked from the other side of the cabin. Because he sounds like he's just barking. Fayez was exercising, strapped against the wall by resistance bands and pushing against them the way she should have been. When this was over, her bone density was going to be a problem. That was for another day. I'm sorry. I'll listen on private. No. This is me starting a conversation, getting attention from my sweetheart, mocking the guy she's paying attention to by saying how he's barking. He's barking about something. Are you sure? She stopped the report playback and stretched. When the Tempest destroyed the defenses on the alien station in the ring space, Elvie said, the enemy didn't respond. When it destroyed Palace Station, everyone in Sol System lost consciousness. And one of the bullets showed up on the Tempest. Trujillo thinks it shows that the ring space isn't part of our universe. Faez relaxed, the bands pulling him back against the wall. He pushed out again, grunting. I didn't know there was an option. The field generator uses antimatter as a primer, but there's not enough power in a couple handfuls of antimatter to spaghettify a station. The design was developed based on the half-built ship, or whatever it was that was in the construction platforms when they were turned on. The one they called the Proteus? Basically, it makes a tiny transitory ring gate, which releases just a lot of energy for free. And apparently, it's violating entropy, which means time. Entropy only runs in one direction. Primary school physics requires 3 hours of barking. He's saying wherever it's getting that energy from doesn't play by our rules. We knew that, though. We suspected it. Do we know it now? We suspect it harder, Elvie said. We're scientists. We only know things until someone shows us we're wrong. Faez chuckled, strained, relaxed. He was waiting for her to laugh with him, but she didn't have it in her. Worry bloomed on his forehead and the angle of his lips. Are you all right? There were 2 more. He stopped, looked at her, and shrugged off the straps. 2 more what? Events. Galbraith's system saw a transitory change in light speed. How long did it last? Literally an unanswerable question, but about an hour. Barragan lost consciousness for 18 minutes. The people who went through it said there was no halo effect, no visual disturbances, just, she snapped her fingers, 18 minutes later. That's new. It's all new. It's all experiments, and none of them are mine. And those are just the ones we know about. If the poking and prodding wasn't someplace we know to look for it, it could be happening much more often. It could be happening right here, right now. He pushed off through the cabin. She was ready to bristle at his touch, too tense for the extra burden of physical contact. He only braced beside her and looked at Trujillo's face, paused on the playback. How's Kara? Faez asked. Fine. She seems fine. I'm a little concerned about these others she's talking about. I know she and Zan are connected somehow at the back, and there are other things back there. Amos Burton went through the same thing they did. And if she's connected with him through the same bridge, that man's head isn't a place I'd want to live. But he didn't push. He let the silence do it for him. Elvie sighed. I'm getting a picture, she said. I'm starting to understand what built the rings and how their minds worked, or mind. Even when I don't understand how their technology works, I'm starting to see the obstacles they were trying to overcome. And that's actually a pretty good starting point. But you're wondering how that can be good enough when the thing they were fighting against killed them and is coming for us. There's so much about that I don't understand. What the bullets are. Scars where their attempts to break us permanently fuck up part of reality? Sure, maybe. But how? What does it do? How do they work? Can we use them to get back to wherever these things are? And how come sometimes they black out one system at a time, and then other times it's everywhere? Why do they blow off locality and then leave a scar or bullet or whatever it is that's in a place and tied to a local frame of reference? And how do you stop them? Elvie wiped away a weary tear. And how do I stop them? Everything's riding on this. Earth, Mars, Laconia, Baragon, Oberon. They all die if I don't solve this. If someone doesn't solve this, Faiz said. We're one ship, and we're on a very promising track, but we're not the only ones looking. They were silent together, only the hum of the ship around them. She shifted, putting her head against his arm. He curled toward her, kissing her ear. When was the last time you slept? What's this sleep you speak of? Sounds nice. He put his arm around her shoulders and drew her gently through the cabin to the sandwich board where she slept when a sack against the wall wasn't enough. She didn't undress, just slipped between the slabs of gel and let them clamp gently down on her, holding her in place like a giant hand. It was the closest analog to climbing into bed under a pile of blankets, and as soon as he dimmed the lights to a sunset red gold, she felt sleep rushing up for her, like she was falling, like she was capable of falling. You need anything? He asked, and his voice was soft as a sand dune washed by a breeze. Despite everything, Elvie smiled. Stay with me until I fall asleep. My mission in life, Faiz said. She let her eyes close and her mind wander. She wondered what it would be like to have Faiz in her private mind, the way Zan and Kara and maybe Burton were in each other's. It had to have some physical element, some center or locus of control that used the same a-local effects that let the gate builders stay connected, neuron analog to neuron analog, through whatever strange dimensions they'd traveled. Maybe if she compared brain morphology, she could find it. Real-time communication between systems would change everything, assuming anyone was still alive to talk. She was on the edge of dream, half convinced that the Falcon had a university campus in it and that she was preparing to give a lecture, when she roused and chuckled. Yes, Faiz said, still there. Lee wants me to give the crew a pep talk, help shore up morale. I told him I would. Any idea what you want to say? No clue, she sighed. Chapter 15, Teresa. Time was a problem. Time was always a problem. It started, she had learned, with the fact that simultaneity was an illusion, and the same time on different planets in different systems was mostly an accounting convenience that only functioned because most people were moving relatively slowly compared to light speed. But beyond that, the measurements of time were embedded in history. An hour had 60 minutes because mathematicians in ancient Babylon had worked in a sexagesimal system. A year was the time it took Earth to make a full transit around Sol. And that mattered, even though Teresa had never been to Earth, and almost certainly never would. Like the number of minutes in an hour, the width of a centimeter, the volume of a liter, the length of a year was the marker by which humanity told the story of itself. And so, because an old planet in another system was in more or less the same position relative to its star now as it had been during the siege of Laconia, Teresa Duarte was going to wake up 16 years old instead of 15. And because of how quickly that same planet spun on its axis, it was still early morning, and she was in her headquarters on the Rossi, drifting between wakefulness and dream. One of the things she'd grown to like about living on the Rocinante was the way it made the cycles of daylight and darkness arbitrary. If the crew had decided that every day lasted 30 hours, then it did. If night and day cycled through 6 hours at a time, then that was true. That they didn't was a choice. And the fact that it was a choice was strangely wonderful. It would have been easy to become unmoored, and it turned out she liked being unmoored. The ability to drift was delicious. Now, lying on a couch in thrust gravity, a fraction of what she'd felt growing up, she was aware of the cool gray walls, the almost dark, lit only by her handheld standby light. At the same time, she was also on Laconia, in a secondary machine shop that opened off her old bedroom and didn't really exist, building something that changed every time she roused a little and slid back down. Dreams of other spaces, secret rooms, hidden passages, forgotten access shafts, had become common for her in the last months. They were probably symbolic of something. She was just fitting a wire lead into a vacuum channel adapter when the dream changed, shifting under her like she'd switched to a different feed. She was still in her real quarters, could see the real walls and light, but they were augmented by black spirals, whose fine detail she was more aware of than the dim light could justify. They seemed to weave and reweave themselves as she watched them. Filaments of black thread that reached out, found each other, built together into a new shape that was also part of the old one. Tiny blue lights wove in and out of the constantly remade spirals too, glimmering like fireflies. As hypnagogic hallucinations went, it was probably the most beautiful her brain had ever come up with.
Okay, guys and girls, I am done. Yeah, I'm sure that you didn't think it was going to happen, but you are wrong. Sometimes I don't quite understand the way that stuff is working. I mean, the framing. It's going too far. What else can I tell you? Nothing really. I will try to make a complete video out of that project. Just because it's been a very long time I did it. But until I do so, I shall go and let you in peace. So, have a good afternoon, or a good morning, a good evening, a good night, wherever you are. Bye.